So we'll have to see if that pyramid's down into that sort of same slope from here. Kind of going on that angle right down that way. And then the question is, how does that relate to this piece? And it's just kind of like a rhombus, just kind of sitting here in the middle. So could that have been upright, pointing, balanced somewhere? I don't know. We'll take a look. And then remove this soil. See what we have going down in this way. These are the pyramids, or triangles anyway. And I just think we're going to see a whole lot of like dragon effigy, Draco. That kind of looks like a, I don't know, sort of like a piece of thing. Maybe it was carved, maybe it flaked off. There's a bunch of things that I could see in that I'm not gonna, read into, but that's all quartz here. White quartz just kind of going that way. And that's Mr. Ace up there saying hello to whoever may be following this. And, as I'm sliding off here, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody that has subscribed, liked, and has tuned into these YouTubes. So, I'm really grateful. I gotta upgrade things like microphones and storytelling components here. So, we're working on that. You can tell there's like all sorts of pieces in play with this site here. And, I start up over here, and then I'm jumping over here, and I'm finding stuff there. And then I jump across, and I'm finding stuff there. And so, I know I can't keep at this alone. So we are exploring relationships with people interested in being part of this journey. So I don't know what exactly that means at this point, whether it's a content platform, publishing, partnership kind of a thing, or if it's something else. Everything is sort of evolving right now, pretty interestingly for us. And while I'm out of breath from just separating this stump here, that alone is it's a lot of work. So we need help. We definitely want to bring enough talented and able components to the equation as far as not just representing Vermont and what Vermonters can do with respect to archaeology, but also how we can be respectful to all the waves of archaeoastronomers that would have been here. And so towards that end, I'm definitely actively working with as many cultural historians as I can, and also archaeologists, knowing that there's a group of people that also want to suppress certain versions of history. So I think it's just a little bit more than demonstrable here as far as the levels of not just celestial alignment, but as you can see with the sun hitting on the rock here, there's no way this wasn't a carved reality. And so I've run it through all kinds of statistical regressions, and of course, that one thing that I just focused on is coming back from various rock apses fossils, and I've done the back research on the dinosaur tracks that those are, and because we also have them elsewhere here on the property, and just the length of this effigy stoneworks, its celestial importance as an observatory, but further with waterworks from melting glaciers. You would have had so much water engineering going on here, and that's the other part of what we're trying to map out. So as people are reaching out for various grant funding opportunities and I'm just really feeling just completely in awe of how many amazing people have stepped up with just beautiful resumes and histories of depth to help us not try to fabricate anything, but rather let research and forensics of what happened here as it relates to the theories and hypotheses I've now not just put out there, but proven, right? So these are all things that we've documented. I've documented in Google Earth. And we have calibration points between different ways of archaeoastronomers. This is not something that I'm unwilling to debate with all the leading experts. And I've openly invited them to come here to kind of have that debate, but few really want to engage because it is pretty heady stuff when you start thinking about how all of these huge boulders, not just a line on this really massively wide corridor of an apex of a parabola that goes from the sunrise at winter solstice to all the way across here, all the way up through the headwaters to the sunrise at the summer solstice. And when you think about it, understanding all the theories I've put forward, of course, you would have that as a constant. So, there's just a lot going on that, scientifically demonstrates these significance and pieces of significance. But even if you just want to map it up to like a comparative of all of the UNESCO sites for the mounds out in the Midwest of the Adena and the Cahokian cultures, they synchronize not because it's some other culture that wasn't the Adena or Cahokian or how it's attributed, but rather because they were also custodians and caretakers of those sacred sites, as many that would have been connected in these kind of global architectures before genocides and famines and just mass death from illness and the equivalent of the quote pandemic, which I'm trying to keep it all in context because there's just so much that we don't really know. And even today, we like to think that we know, but our best experts kind of tend to let us down. So the idea that we have as these alternate theories isn't so conspiratorial or alternate as much as it is rethinking the frameworks of compliance and propaganda that we've all been asked to buy into as a culture so that we can protect our own. And what does that mean? Is it white skin? I think our ancestors all tie back further before white and red and yellow and black and brown were gradients that we use to differentiate ourselves. Unfortunately, it's harder for humans to think back fast, and far, because we're always looking to be fast in the moment. And it's unfortunate because if you really break it down, there's no way that there wasn't. I'm not talking just some ancient civilization living here. I'm saying I've documented 5 ways, including myself, of this side of the glacier Maximus that literally have inhabited this area as far as these clockworks go. And from a comparison to all those other UNESCO sites, it matches in length and scale of 1,400 feet as far as also the parabola that also you can see here, it kind of maybe snake effigies up into there, into the quarry. I have some theories. I'm not saying I'm 100% on how it zigzags through here, but then it picks up the parabola on the North Mound as it goes all the way up to the headwaters at sunrise at solstice in the summer. So, my point is, since it's comparatively exactly like all these other UNESCO sites, and I've posited that we're the missing link between effectively Machu Picchu and the Sayak Marca site, I'm probably saying that wrong, but location I'm so desperate to go, well, maybe not desperate, but I'm excited to go see at some point. But I do believe being on the exact same longitudinal magnetic north-south line that we are, with it, that creates the base and the constant from which these parabolas then help you measure things like the wobble of Earth in exact degrees, the tilt of Earth in exact degrees relative to star maps that you would be able to triangulate. Now, there's another theory, and I've proposed this one, that there's a site out in the Pacific that is an equilateral triangle from the Peruvian site and the stoneworks here. And, the LiDAR suggests there's definitely something below at that location, and the plausibility of it is not impossible, but I'm not hanging my hat on that. So if that is a reality, there are some people that want to talk about the lost continent of Mu, and I wouldn't necessarily frame it as a lost continent so much as to say, without going too deep, it has far more to do with the water displacement coming out of many mile high glacier events, and how that would create not just a very even displacement of water around a perfect circle, but rather a lopsided displacement into the Pacific, which would have created more of a isostatic or an isostasis effect, and you just would have more of an impact than this idea of sea level rise is only 400 feet, or whatever the prevailing theories are. But in that reality, we then can look backwards and say the plausibility of ancient civilization isn't just 5 cultures separated by a few millennia in between, but rather theoretically could be 10, 15. I would probably not go on record as saying I think it's more than the 5 that I can prove. But the 6th that I know I guess I can prove a 6th wave existed, in that the LiDAR data has an interruption point that's specifically tied to a 12,000 year mark relative to the glacial meltwaters, 2B, pulse 2B in this case. So in that light, you're kind of like in this space where recognizing that 6 waves, including what we call First Nation, which here in Vermont, there's some people trying to suggest the Odanak and Wabanaki don't have a right to have state recognition. And the idea that these lines of demarcation that separate Canada from America relative to their actual rights and claims to existing in America and Vermont specifically, I think are very demonstrable by the fact that their headquarters now just due north of us, and not more than 2 hours. I mean, it's literally like right over the border. And so they're settled in the plain of the washout from that glacier event. They were the First Nations here after all of it dissipated, and the washout of everything, including their past ancestors that were here in Vermont and likely down into Massachusetts, along with all of our shared ancestors. But the reality is, how far back do we want to go in that ancestry? Because it's like the more we uncover actual history, whether it's skeletal mitochondrial DNA or RNA analysis, or just the idea that we call out education constructs and say, why are we still teaching the evolution of humans this way? It's based on a Mercator map. And I'm not talking challenging high school level teachers and academic curriculum creators. I'm talking about challenging college level and post-college, post degree, just thinkers that literally are trying to suggest that we know everything because we understand millennia that collate and coincide with the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, etc. But we don't really say it that way. That's what we agree to as the timeline of Western thought. And then when we start to really break it down, science doesn't stick with that. So all that skeletal analysis, all of the migratory patterns, when you're looking at it simply on a Mercator map that shows post-glacial meltwater, that literally doesn't account for models of isostatic pressure and all kinds of gravitational forces relative to water displacement, whether you're applying an Archimedes principle or some ancient version of that I think was necessary for a group of people to come together to understand they had to carve the ice in a certain direction that explains why our geology today, in reality of everybody's existence, has massive glacial erratics going due south from that same location. So, and also coming from the west to a southeast trajectory from New York. So you have this inverted cone from the Adirondacks to Vermont, maybe even over into New Hampshire. That's why the Connecticut River drops one direction. Vermont exits south in two directions, one to Connecticut River and one to the Hudson River. And then if you go north of Whitehall, New York, it exits in two directions, one up into sort of northern Canada, which then goes on to the Atlantic, and one that goes up into the St. Lawrence River and exits out into the Great Lakes that way. And so the reality of this as a fulcrum point for water distribution, and thinkers that were working in ways to divert water as an engineering tool to shape massive things, is not unfounded. So that's all part of what's going on. I don't know, sort of a train of thought, but I think just on a comparative level, understanding the significance of how this maps to all these other sites is pretty critical. Understanding how when you make those connections, and I have in Google Earth, it's impossible to do it someplace else. It doesn't work out as perfectly. Like literally to all the pyramids, to all of the petroglyphs, all of the sites. And from here, and from this site in Peru, when you do that, it creates a latitude and longitude system that's near perfect in its degrees of separation as far as latitudes to that OG prime meridian. Now, layer in the fact that there's two spots here that you could sort of calibrate, a third being just the first location over on the northern mound, potentially used twice over. I mean, there's another wave that I look at. I definitely want to make more effort to include other voices and interpretations of what could have happened, because I don't want to be the only voice at that table. But what I can prove are three iterations of calibrations to the North Star. One in the Bronze Age, one in a post-Paleolithic space, potentially, where a 20-foot radius capstone would have been floated down on snow and ice and potentially located over three additional massive glacial erratics, and then aligned to the winter solstice as they are, and the summer solstice as it is, et cetera, to the rise. And it's a crisscross at a certain point in time, which relates to the North Star more towards Hercules and Tau Hercules, as opposed to, say, Thuban in Draco constellation. However, when we go out to the third location over there, we are looking at Polaris and the North Star as far as the Little Dipper and its location relative to this stoneworks, as far as also locating from there to all of the surrounding Green Mountains and Worcester Range behind it, as far as alignments to the peaks relative to the radians. So that's another way people can proof my work if they want to do it rather simply, is take a Google Earth snapshot down on this location, pretty much go right in front of Meta House, right near the bridge. We have this little flag there. It'd probably take some time to get there. But you draw lines in 10-degree increments from that point in a 36 lines running off of that, and they will line up to all the peaks of the Worcesters and all the Green Mountains. And you can keep running this to all the GPS points I've plotted to all the pyramids in the Central American and Mexican areas, which, to kind of maybe wrap this up, is where these triangles tend to point in those southeastern directional coordinates. So, that's kind of like the whole spiel for today. That's all that direction. That's Central America and Mexico. And then if you go this way, due south, straight into Meta House, that is the basically the OG longitude is right above us here. And that goes all the way through South America after passing through Haiti. But now, theoretically, today I kind of resolved the idea that scientifically I could wrap my head around the idea that pre-glacial meltwater 2B, event 2B, pulse water melt to 2B, I should get it right eventually. Before all of that, or maybe like right after that, you would have had a massive amount of water displaced into the Atlantic. And I think whatever land mass, we now think of the Antilles as islands in the Caribbean. And while they are, the landmass that all connected them from that original volcanic OG events for that space and time of that not Lemurian, but the Antillean continent, if you will. I'm not referring to it legitimately as a continent. I would just refer to it more in the sense of that entire landmass and all of those theories about the Bimini Road. I don't know nearly enough. I've never really been the chaser of Atlantis or any of these mysteries. But if you're looking at the Bimini Road as it relates to a previous landmass down in that specific space and time, I don't think it's hard to kind of recognize the fact that that island would have been a lot larger before it would have been pummeled by the glacial meltout from here. But if it alternately wasn't that, which follows the geologic reality of how we find glacial erratics due south all the way down through Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Long Island, and off into the Atlantic seaboard, where it drops off the continental shelf rather rapidly. All very modeled, and that's science. We know these to be facts. But, in that scenario, you could definitely see how there's a total feasibility of all those components being where the Odanak, from up north would have been looking at like all this post-trauma as survivors of all that and coming back from that wave. I think we've got the Nordic wave where they're over here, coming in as the Vikings as that opens up the northern travel. Iceland bopping up to Greenland, bopping over to Vinland. Vinland in 1100, we know that settlement is a UNESCO site. That's also well documented. We have sites down in Georgia, all throughout south, east, and into New Mexico, and the Vikings and various waves of druids from that passage throughout northeast, of course, and what probably transferred into the witches and warlocks of the oh wow, this is starting to pop out. I didn't realize this. That was kind of like a really neat set of lines there. But yeah, so then we've got like all kinds of waves of folks that would have laid claim to these sort of stoneworks restorations that, it's one of those things where just keeping that knowledge base alive probably didn't relate to a singular skin color or religion, but probably was very poly in its sort of acceptance of anybody that wanted to learn how the stuff made stuff relevant to travel, to astronomy, to navigation. I don't know. Anyway, so that's kind of like where I was sort of thinking about how we treat this from an archaeological perspective. We want to make sure that all these voices, not just like, yes, maybe there was a Bronze Age because the oceans would have been right up to the western edge of this meadow and maybe a little bit lower. So, this would have been a prime space where it's easy to sail into, and here's this like stoneworks, and you have all this, really heavy amounts of stoneworks that probably were quarried from right next door that literally would be assembled because, well, there's not a geologic explanation that suggests why it's in this perfect parabola shape and not anywhere else on our property. But, let's go down the road that it was some OG volcanic spewing that goes up, to White Rock, which it probably does to a large extent. But as far as the spewing is probably over there at the quarry, and that probably goes all the way up through the Hunger Ravines. And this has more to do with what was quarried out of there as far as the quartz inclusions, and I think there's a lot more stacked stone going on in here. But if you look at that site over by the dolmen, you would see how they could use snow to move large stones and just slide them into place. I kind of theorize that, maybe this goes back even further. Maybe there was like a larger wave that we're trying to encapsulate in Atlas And I think in that light, you'd have potentially some people that'd be all about the kind of from a Paleolithic era, and might go down even further down into this space where we have layers of basalt. So there's this kind of goes out to that sunset at the winter solstice, right? So that's a significant site. Clearly somebody was trying to notate that from a later civilization's existence here. So does this exist as like a pyramidal stacked stone back there? My theory now is yes, and part of it has to do with stones like this. Right, so parts of it are just so smooth and perfectly aligned to these carvings, and then it drops into these really rough shapes, and not nearly as perfect. So I think my let's see if I can get that right there. Yeah, my phone is doing some weird stuff, but yeah, so this is, you can kind of see how it's just super different texture-wise, and it's not just because of lichen or the ways soil sat on stuff. It's definitely different styles of carving, as if parts of it were already underground and parts of it were exposed, similar to the textures up here. So I think there's something about that if I was to guess, this one's a little bit looser of a hypothesis, but all of this material here, it's a lot, would have probably expanded out this direction and sat, going through the house that direction out to this side of the greenhouse there. So there's also material on that side that would have done that as well. But that would have created a crescent from which you could measure against the mountain range behind us. And from down in there is a cartographic potential. After that, they might have needed to break apart this level of stone to have a different sight line that now my house blocks, but all the same, we got the roof deck to pick up those sight lines that actually helped me realize that this wasn't what I originally thought it was. And things like, I haven't touched these stones in 30 years that I lived here, but they do sort of coordinate to the different sunrise from summer solstice to winter solstice, sunset from summer solstice to winter solstice. So there's like these planes of angles are like literally in that alignment. Is that because somebody was trying to leave a message? A little Easter hunt? I don't fucking know. It just is exactly a data point though, right? So, and then you start getting a bunch of those data points where you're not like invested in them as like, I want to live my life by this data point. But then all of a sudden you're like, shit, I've lived here 30 years. I never noticed there's like this round ring of stone. It like literally is this perfectly round ring of stone here in different layers, which now are kind of covered up with the stone here. But I mean, what's up with that? And then it's like all on this like line where there was once an equinox that sets due west right through here. Yep. And there's A's. And all these other pieces of stoneworks, which, all of them are like carved in shapes. This is not like arbitrary like stonework that you normally see. Just, oh hey, look, we dug up a bunch of stones. Everything is just, yeah. It's hard to explain just how massive it is in that sense of archaeological reality, maybe? I don't know. All right, I'm gonna leave it there. Hope everybody's well. Peace.